We must root out the purveyors of greed and corruption in both parties, whose presence infects the bloodstream of government.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, Terry Martin, and we are going to be talking, Jeff and I, about the governor's State of the State address and some of the major points that he made. And Jeff, as we are sitting here, there is some breaking news happening just moments ago from the White House. They're updating on the coronavirus, and we wanted to give our public a bit of an opportunity first before we get into Illinois news to hear some of the latest.
Currently, the risk to the American public is low. As of today, there are nearly 9,700 cases in China, with more than 200 deaths. Additionally, currently there are another 23 countries that have confirmed totally 132 cases. This also includes 12 individuals who have been confirmed in 6 countries who did not travel to China. CDC has launched an aggressive public health response focused on early case recognition, isolation of those cases identified, and contact tracing around those individuals. This response is a layered response, which includes both targeted airport screening as well as heightened education and awareness of the American healthcare community to be vigilant in ascertaining the possibility of recent travel to China when they are evaluating patients with upper respiratory tract infection. To date, we have confirmed 6 cases of this novel virus in the United States. Most recent case had no travel history to China, but was a close personal contact of one of the previous cases that we had identified through our aggressive contact tracing. In addition, there are currently 191 individuals that are under investigation. Once again, I want to emphasize that this is a significant global situation and it continues to evolve. But I also want to emphasize again that the risk at this time to the American public is low.
And so the risk to the American public is low, Jeff, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll keep you updated on that. We'll try to follow up with the Illinois Department of Public Health. Obviously, this is a growing concern around the world. And Jeff, because of this coronavirus, just today the market fell precipitously. I don't have the actual numbers, but it was down about 600 points earlier in the day on concerns this would disrupt the world economy. But now, Jeff, the news locally that happened this week was the governor's address. It was his State of the State address on Wednesday.
Well, you know, basically that address is used to set some priorities, and it's kind of a rallying cry. It's also an opportunity for the governor to take a victory lap, to look back at the last year and say, boy, we've made a lot of progress. We're not, the parties or Republicans and Democrats are not battling with each other. We had a budget last year, we'll have another one now. It's kind of like morning in Illinois again. You know, Reagan said morning in America, morning in Illinois. It's good times. But is it? Because right around the same time as the speech was an indictment of, well, actually a criminal information. Senator Sandoval copped a guilty plea and basically showed he's going to be cooperating. So not the kind of thing for morning in Illinois. So the governor led off essentially, or at least highlighted ethics reform and what they're going to do about it. And maybe we'll have a clip. Do we have a clip there that would show the folks what Governor Pritzker said about ethics reform? And if we're not ready to that, I'll just... We do have it. Just, I may have caught my good partner by surprise.
Well, no, we're just that sometimes you got to push a couple buttons to get from A to B.
Right.
So, yes, let's take a listen. One of the things that the governor, again, in the context, there has obviously been this investigation going on. Jeff just mentioned Senator Sandoval not only was indicted, he pled guilty recently. There's a lot of discussion behind the scenes at the Capitol that concern about what else is going to happen. I will share with you, Jeff, before we play the governor's clip here on ethics, that one member of the legislature told me the other day when they were in that he heard that maybe they were going to cancel the session next week because there were going to be more indictments. Now, I haven't heard anything about it. I don't think that's going to happen, but it gives the flavor for the kind of concern that is going on and the confusion going on behind the scenes at the state capitol. But let's listen to what the governor did say on ethics during his State of the State address.
It's no longer enough to sit idle while under-the-table deals, extortion, or bribery persist. Protecting that culture or tolerating it is no longer acceptable. We must take urgent action to restore the public's trust in our government. That's why we need to pass real, lasting ethics reform this legislative session. It's time to end the practice of legislators serving as paid lobbyists. In fact, it's time to end the for-profit influence peddling among all elected officials at every level of government in Illinois.
And so the governor said ethics is going to be one of the hallmarks of this legislative session, and I would say a lot of the people on the street would say it's about time, Jeff.
Well, you know, the thing is, there's only so much you can do, but you got to do something. You got to take a stab at it. When I say there's only so much you can do, you know, you can set out the laws. We have them. Sandoval's indicted, or he's copped a plea on not paying his income taxes, filing a false income tax return, something to that effect, in bribery. So those things are illegal, folks. You don't need a new law to stop that. But you hope you can sort of hem people in a little bit. So one of the things the governor said was, look, we need to have a revolving door. A lot of states have that. What does that mean? You have somebody who's a senator or who's a state rep, and as soon as they retire, they step right into being lobbyists and lobby the very people who were their colleagues. So a lot of states might set a certain time and may say, well, you can't go and do that for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. It's usually not indefinitely. It's not a perfect thing because you can go and become a lawyer. You can go, there are a lot of different ways in which you can do it, but you might give that a try, and they probably will. You can ramp up disclosure quite a bit. We don't have as much disclosure as we could have in Illinois, as opposed to specifics on assets, specifics on income, where they come from, etc. So we could do that. The real thing you could do, which you didn't mention, here's a little hint, you could start capping outside income, because you can talk about banning lobbyists, and then it's what about lawyers? You're not going to ban that. But if you had a cap, say on 40,000, no more than 40,000 in outside income.
I'm not sure that would be constitutional.
Well, you can give it a shot. I mean, but the point is, that kind of thing might have an impact, because there's so many ways in which people can get into businesses that are conflicts of interest.
I don't think you can cap outside income like that. I think what you can do is to say you can't work with people that you're doing. You got to watch the conflicts of interest. I think that's what the governor was saying. That's why I said I didn't know. A lot of lawmakers didn't know until just recently that you could be a lobbyist while you're a lawmaker. The only provision was you couldn't, I think, lobby on some of the people that came before your committee or something like that. But it's kind of shocking to even know that.
Okay, Rich Miller talks about the enablers, okay? He doesn't quite say, but...
I'm sorry, he talks about the what?
Enablers.
Enablers.
People who enable people like Sandoval to exist. Well, think about it. He was chairman of the Transportation Committee. You make a lot of decisions where if you want to, collect a bribe, you can. So what do? You make sure the people in those positions are squeaky clean, have not been there too long, and I don't see Madigan doing that. Didn't see Cullerton doing that. Basically, Rich Miller, without calling him out, Rich Miller's the guy who runs Capital Facts, major publication throughout Illinois. Rich Miller is basically saying our leaders in the Senate, Democratic, in the Senate and the House, could do more to monitor these folks, and if they sense something's not right there, get them out of it.
Well, and let's point out. Okay, let's point out that we have a brand new Senate President, Don Harmon. You'll notice who just began this legislative session. So we'll have to see how Senator Harmon works. I think it's interesting the governor, it's understandable that he is, but it's good that the governor is making ethics such a point. And Regarding enablers, I think the governor actually spoke a bit about that. Let's have another bite that the governor said in his State of the State.
Disclosure of conflicts of interest and punishment for breaching them must be included in any ethics package for us to truly clean up government. Most states have a revolving door provision for legislators, and it's time for Illinois to join them. Elected officials shouldn't be allowed to retire and immediately start lobbying their former colleagues. It's wrong, and it's got to stop.
It's got to stop, and we'll see how the lawmakers go along with the governor on that one.
Okay, moving right along, another major topic that the governor mentioned in his speech was pensions. Kind of took a victory lap for passing legislation that consolidated 650 police and fire funds into one or two. That's all around the state, but it accepted Chicago, which where your major pension problem is, not just for police and fire, but that's a good part of it. So they're accepted. And the main thing with pensions, it's the state of Illinois has a $270 billion pension hole. Didn't say a word about that as to what he would do, other than he mentioned a buyout. That's really insufficient to address that. He says that's on his agenda. He's got to do a lot more. One other thing I'll mention before we go on is, I think the major complaint, and look, he did a number of positive things last year, and they were mentioned. So what I'm trying to do here is not be repetitive and mention all the positive things he referred to, but some of the negatives that he didn't address. The major one is no real fiscal reforms, major reforms. You didn't hear him talking about workers' comp, which Rauner tried to do, workers' compensation reform. You didn't hear him talking about tort reform. You didn't hear him talking about how to get growth ramped up substantially. He talked about, some job stimulus programs, but I think he didn't get at the heart of why Illinois may be lagging its surrounding and competitor states.
The governor did take, let's before we're not going to talk entirely about the State of the State,
Right.
and we have the budget address coming up in about the third week of February, where the governor should lay out his spending programs. The State of the State was, a lot of it was looking at the first year and what was accomplished. Let's take a listen to what the governor said in those regards.
We passed a bipartisan, truly balanced budget on time, with renewed investments in job creation, cradle-to-career education, and physical and mental health care. Even the credit rating agencies and financial analysts described a distinct improvement in our fiscal stability, and investors took notice and lowered our state's borrowing rate.
So while we don't have all the reforms that you mentioned, at least the governor is saying that we've made a lot of improvements and that the state's free fall into financial calamity maybe has been momentarily stemmed. Of course, the governor wants the voters to approve a fair tax in November that would change the Illinois Constitution. That's one of the economic reforms, Jeff, he would say that he wants to bring. Many of the Republicans are opposed to that, as well as a number of the business groups around the state.
Well, that ties in with one other topic he addressed briefly, but I would raise some issues as to whether he addressed that topic sufficiently, and that would be property tax reform or reducing property taxes. The one thing you might say the parties, Republican and Democrat, are in agreement on is that property taxes are way too high. They are in disagreement as to how to best address that issue. Okay, the governor talked about savings from his consolidation legislation on police and fire municipalities, police and fire pensions around the state. That doesn't really get at property taxes that much. It gets on a little bit, okay? He talked about savings from consolidating local units of government, which would lower that cost. Most people, even the Democrats I talked to, would say, and many Republicans, there's just not that much there. It sounds great, you might do it, but it's really small, okay? And Don Harmon actually talked about elsewhere pushing the income tax up as a way of putting less pressure on spending on education on the local units, because Illinois constitutionally is supposed to be the major provider of education, or spender, if you want to put it that way. And they're probably providing about 25% of the spending on education. If you push it up to 50%, it's going to be a major increase, in terms of income taxes of 5 or 6 billion. And I'll get to that in a second. The point is, you can't do that. And folks, if you're wondering why, I'll tell you in a second. But you see, or I'll tell you right now, because you just mentioned the progressive income tax, which is on the ballot in November. And the governor really did not highlight that. I was surprised in his speech. May have mentioned it, but Harmon did. Harmon said that's really important because if you can get that progressive income tax, he says, then you'll be able to push up the income tax, which in terms of revenue, which it'll do. It'll give the state $3.6 billion more as planned in revenue, and that'll help us spend more on education from the state level, less on the local level. The problem is it's already been promised. The structural deficit, and the governor would agree with this, to his numbers, Office of Management and Budget, the structural deficit is about $2 to $3 billion in coming years, the next 3 to 4 years. Okay, so if your structural deficit is $2 to $3 billion and you're only going to have 3.6 coming in additional revenue, that's not enough to do what you want to do, unless you're going to raise your rates much higher on the middle class and on higher income rates. So you see, the problem is he's got all this spending coming up to deal with structural deficits, to deal with, our friends at Truth in Accounting would say, don't really have a balanced budget because we're not paying the total we should for pensions. If we did that, he's going to need another $3 to $4 billion a year for that. And also his backlog.
Yeah, what?
You see, so in other words, short of what I'm saying is, if the governor wants to address all these things I just talked about, that he and President Harmon have talked about, he's not going to need a $3.6 billion increase. He's going to need a $10 billion increase. So we need to have a chat. The governor needs to have a chat with some of his critics about that. And the Republicans might be the people to raise some of those issues.
Look, everyone has to look at these numbers and realize, and many have said, that until you make changes to the pension benefits, you're never going to get a handle on it, because as most people who follow this, the pension benefits grow by 3% automatically. So when you look at the history of state spending, what we are doing, we have really ramped up our spending over the last 10 years dramatically. We are currently at a $40 billion state budget. Among all the states, that's one of the very highest. The other thing is, when you mention Truth in Accounting, we have the city of Chicago. Our friends at Truth in Accounting, and we hope to have a interview coming up on this, but they just recently put out their report of the major metropolitan cities in the United States at their financial situation. Chicago was second to last, only ahead of New York City. So we are looking not only at the state level, but we're looking obviously at Chicago, and Chicago is such an economic driver for the state, of major economic hurdles that we're facing. And so one will have to pay attention when the governor gives his budget address. I believe it's around February 21, if I remember. I may have that wrong. We'll have to see what the governor's prescription is, aside from the fair tax. And the other thing is, at what point do you just tax people so much that they just increase the out-migration, or the migration out of Illinois, as we have already seen? I think for the last 5 or 6 years now, the state has been losing population. So it's good that the governor is taking a bow. We're not knocking the governor. The governor said in his address there's some professional naysayers out there, and he doesn't like that they're always preaching gloom and doom. I think he was talking about some of our friends at Wire Points, perhaps. But you know what? There's a lot of gloom and doom still out there, and we can't sweep it under the rug by just being artificial optimism. We're going to have to make some real reforms. You and I, our job is to point that out for the citizens and to give them the straight scoop as much as we know it. We're happy to pat people on the back for a job well done, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be taking a very sober look at these financial problems.
Well, one way, the most thoughtful way, as far as I see it, in my opinion, to reform pensions to address the very issue you talked about, reducing pension benefits, the only way to do that I know of is to amend the Illinois Constitution. And so, and if you do that, then you will be allowed to decrease pension benefits. The other way would be to allow the state to have the state legislate to give the cities and villages the power to file for bankruptcy. So Chicago might be able to restructure some of its liabilities, including its pensions. And they're the major pension problem for the cities in Illinois. And so the governor says he doesn't want to do those two things. And I guess he doesn't want to ask the federal government for Illinois to have the power to file for bankruptcy so they could restructure their pension liabilities. That's fine if he wants to take that approach, but he has to come up with a specific plan to address the $270 billion in Illinois pension liabilities, unfunded, and the $70 billion in Chicago.
Okay.
And I haven't heard that.
Well,
Have you heard that,
I
Terry?
haven't. But let's move along a little bit. As everyone knows, this is Campaign 2020. We are going to be voting not only for the president and Congress and the new legislature, but Jeff, a lot of people seem to have overlooked the fact we're also going to be voting again for U.S. senators. Senator Dick Durbin is seeking his 5th term in the U.S. Senate. He's first elected in 1996. And so a lot of people think that Durbin is unbeatable and have not really paid too much attention to those Republicans. There's 5 candidates seeking to replace him. 5 candidates seeking, I should say, the Republican nomination. We interviewed a Republican candidate, Dr. Tom Tarter from the Springfield area. He spoke with us for about 40 minutes, but we pulled a soundbite. He is a medical doctor, and he talked about medical issues as part of our interview. Let's listen to his prescription.
Insurance companies set prices with provider groups. That's hospital systems, physician groups. But those deals are carefully guarded secrets. The American Hospital Association has spent $20 million lobbying against the transparency rule. So I'm not going to get endorsed by the Illinois Hospital Association, I guarantee that. Because when you don't know the value of your healthcare dollar, that is the best outcome for the least cost, then the prices vary hugely. In cities, a single surgical procedure can vary by 400% of Medicare fee for service. And the reason for that?
So Jeff, Dr. Tarter wants what the president is calling for. He's calling for price transparency, where all hospitals around the country would have to post their prices and bring in the marketplace. Before we talk about that, I want to quickly get to another bite. We also interviewed Mark Curran, the former sheriff of Lake County. One of his big issues is law enforcement.
We have roadblocks for alcohol, DUI weekends where we potentially think there's a problem. We stop every 5th car and we see if they're under the influence, and if we have a reasonable suspicion that leads to probable cause, we can move from there. Similarly, we could do that in the inner cities where we could have we could set the police up and just stop and frisk as people come down the street. Every so many get stopped. You'd have to put it out that you're doing that. That's what's required by the Constitution, is that you declare you're going to be doing this in advance. But we can't handcuff our police if we want to be kept safe.
So there you see it, folks. Those are 2 of the 5 Republican primary candidates for the U.S. Senate. That primary is March 17th. Curran and Tapper, you can find them both. Go watch the entire video of the interview by Terry Martin. And you can find that at youtube.com/IllinoisChannelTV. And Terry, you just have a few minutes left. Let's turn to the impeachment mania that swept the country for the last 2 months.
Right. Well, actually, for even more than that, it's another breaking story. We started off with the coronavirus also happening today. We think is going to be the vote in the Senate. We're not sure because things can change, but we think there's going to be a vote in the Senate. The expectation is it's going to be to exonerate the president, since the Republicans control the Senate. One of the president's, and I don't have the individual's name, maybe you know it, Jeff, but one of his lawyers spoke this afternoon on the impeachment. Let's just listen to some of the comments as they were wrapping up this afternoon.
From start to finish, in this case, from September 24th to the articles of impeachment were considered in the Judiciary Committee, was done in 78 days. In 78 days, and for the 71 of them, the president was entirely locked out. The new normal would be slapdash, get it done quickly, unfair procedures in the House to impeach a president, then bring it to the Senate, and then all the real work of investigation and discovery is going to have to take place with that impeachment hanging over the president's head. And that's a particular thing that the framers also were concerned about.
That's Deputy White House Counsel Philbin. He's been the laboring oar for a lot of the show. He's not a real flashy guy. He's not a Ken Starr. He's not a constitutional lawyer like our good friend Alan Dershowitz. But he's carried it a lot. He keeps pretty organized. And look, all you have to know about impeachment after all this fuss, okay, is that everybody knew from the get-go that the Senate wasn't going to vote for two-thirds. They need 2/3 of the Senate, 67 votes, to remove the president. That was never going to happen. And the Democrats wanted to at least prolong it. This is a TV show, which I know most people aren't watching, but it provides them an opportunity for their ads and running in the House races and the Senate races and somewhat in the presidential election. So as a TV show setting it up for that, and they wanted to prolong it. And to do that, they needed to get 4 Republicans to join the 47 Democrats and prolong it by their motion for witnesses. They will lose on that this afternoon, almost surely. We're taping it on July 31st, folks, right? We're taping, Terry, what is it, 3:30 in the afternoon?
Just 4 o'clock right now.
Most likely they will vote. If they don't finish it tonight, they will try to finish it on Monday, and they'll have that. They may have the vote today on witnesses, and then they'll go to voting not to remove the president. And so the basic thing is they got the 2 votes. They didn't keep all 53 Republicans on the motion to not to have additional witnesses, but they kept Lamar Alexander and they kept Lisa Murkowski. So that was 51-49. And that's what you have to know. And look, one other thing, and then we'll get Terry's views on this. But the clear thing here, which all Republicans could agree, even the ones who voted for more witnesses, this was not impeachable conduct. The short of it is, what's impeachable conduct? Think of what happened in the Nixon case. Nixon didn't get impeached, but everybody knows, so I won't go through it. But if you knew what Nixon did there, that was impeachable. The president wasn't even close. So even if the facts were all true, even if you accept their criteria, the wrong criteria, just ask yourself, was this criminal-like behavior? Didn't have to be a crime. Criminal-like? Was this Nixon-like? Not a chance. Agreed?
No, Jeff, and we only have a couple of seconds here left. But the thing is, I think a lot of people, what will be interesting is after this is done, will the voters hold one of the parties accountable? Will they say the Democrats were using the equivalent of the nuclear bomb in politics, impeachment, and were they minimizing that and being frivolous with it? Will they hold the Democrats responsible, or will they vote against the president and some of those in the Senate who voted to exonerate it? We'll have to wait and see about that. But as always, there are some weeks we could use 2 hours instead of just our 30 minutes, Jeff, but it always goes by faster than we realize.
See you folks next week.